Fast and funny, smart and very nimble is his mind, the poet thinks, making what is complicated simple, mixing metaphors like drinks. Hi, I'm Helen Sword. This is Helen's Word, and I'm indebted to poet Gershon Hepner for providing that lovely metaphor of mixing metaphors like drinks in the opening stanza of his poem, Mixed Metaphor. For today's Wordcraft Workout, we're going to look at a particularly egregious example of mixed metaphor before turning to scrutinize our own use of metaphor. For this exercise, you'll need a sample of your own writing, several pages long, preferably printed out in hard copy so that you can mark it up with colored pencils or highlighters. So gather your materials, and when you're ready, let's put your writing through a workout. Let's start with an example supplied by Douglas Hofstadter, one of the sharpest wordsmiths I know, who wrote to me in an email. One day in the summer of 1972 in the Museum of Modern Art, I read this piece of incomprehensible gobbledygook by Lincoln Kirstein, part of the label to a photograph by W. Eugene Smith. But he was unable to spotlight it in an arcane proscenium or narcissistic sadomasochism on the level of an art historical palimpsest. Doug wrote, I copied it down into a little notebook, astounded by its opacity. Just came across it yesterday, 48 years later, to my chagrin and amusement. What makes this extraordinary sentence so incomprehensible, so opaque? Well, partly it's the jargon. Words such as arcane, proscenium, narcissistic, sadomasochism, and palimpsest are all frankly a bit niche. They rely on the reader to have quite a broad general knowledge in a wide range of subject areas ranging from sexual deviancy to medieval manuscript culture. But even if we understand all those big words, the sentence, to be quite frank, makes no sense because it's teeming with mixed metaphors. Let's start by unpacking one of the sentence's more transparent visual images. And by the way, I just used a mixed metaphor right there. Did you catch it? To spotlight means to shine a light on, to highlight, to emphasize. In our minds, we might picture a performer on a darkened stage, standing in a cone of light, or children running around in a dark backyard, trying to tag each other with beams from their flashlights. So what is being spotlighted in this sentence? That is, what is he, the protagonist of the sentence, unable to spotlight? Well, we don't know what the it in the sentence actually refers to, since the sentence itself has been taken out of its original context. But whatever it is, we know it can't be spotlighted in an arcane proscenium. So that's the arch that separates the audience from a stage in a theater, or in ancient theaters, the word proscenium may refer to the stage itself. So far, so good. Spotlight and proscenium are both theatrical terms. So the protagonist of the sentence, he, cannot spotlight it, whatever it is, in an arcane proscenium. Nor can he spotlight it in narcissistic sadomasochism. Oh dear, we've suddenly lost sight of the theater metaphor, to say nothing of the spotlight. Can narcissistic sadomasochism be spotlighted? I'm really struggling to visualize what that sight might look like, or maybe I'd rather not. And things only get worse from there. If we leave out that arcane proscenium and the narcissistic sadomasochism for a moment, we can telescope the sentence grammatically to read as follows. But he was unable to spotlight it on the level of an art historical palimpsest. Now, a palimpsest is a piece of papyrus or a vellum manuscript on which new writing has been superimposed over earlier text that still remains partly visible. Or more generally, a palimpsest may signify any object or entity that has been reused or altered but still bears visible traces of its earlier form. You could say that a palimpsest has levels, or at least layers, of meaning or of text, for example. And you could, I suppose, spotlight a palimpsest by shining a light on it to reveal those levels or layers. But how one might spotlight anything, quote, on the level of an art historical palimpsest is beyond me. And by the time you throw the arcane proscenium back into the mix, along with a measure of narcissistic sadomasochism, the sentence has pretty much forfeited any chance it once had of making sense. Pretentious jargon has contributed to the disaster, but the real train wreck has been caused by reckless mixing of metaphors. So how can you avoid falling into the mixed metaphor trap? Read through the sentences in your writing sample and try to visualize everything you describe, even, indeed especially when you're writing metaphorically, figuratively rather than literally, or when you're using abstract rather than concrete language. So, for example, if you're putting forward a new theoretical framework, try to actually picture that framework, for example, as the scaffolding around a building. What verb or verbs have you chosen to accompany that framework, and do they fit the metaphor? For example, in the material world, you're more likely to build or erect a framework than to, say, propose one. It's much harder to visualize. Some of the most hideous and mismatched metaphors are spawned from the ill-advised pairing of a verb with a noun from a different metaphorical register. For example, it's fine to explore unknown territory. The verb explore and the noun territory fit together nicely. And academic writers can also get away with exploring a concept. That's a concrete verb, explore, zhuzhing up an abstract noun, concept. But when you talk about, say, exploring a framework, the journey metaphor, explore, gets tangled up with the construction metaphor, framework, and the whole edifice crumbles. Or should I say, your scaffolding paddles away up the river. Have fun rooting mixed metaphors out of your sentences. Think of them as weeds choking out your flower garden, or as mud diluting the clear stream of your prose. Thanks for showing up to write, and I'll see you next time.